Welcome everyone to episode number 37 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. We have a cool show again today. It's going to be a fun one. It's all about fishing lore.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, more sound effects.
Yep. If you're listening to this on YouTube, you won't hear anything. That's why I highly recommend listening to the edited and squeaky version of the podcast on Spotify and Apple.
That's right. Jesse lowers his voice and raises mine.
Yes.
So this isn't our first episode on fishing lore. I believe this is our third one.
This is episode 3.
Back
by popular
37,
demand.
but it's a third one on lore.
Yes.
So I have a few different stories and creatures and whatnot that we're going to be talking about this episode. But to get us started, we first have a little, even more stories. We have a story time from Jesse himself. So let's hear you regale us with this excellent little story here, Jesse.
All right. We always say to people, when people ask us that, you guys have been fishing together a lot for a long time. Mm-hmm. That is true. Me and Andrew have been fishing together for over 20 years, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But I thought I would tell a story.
Crazy.
Yeah. I thought I would tell you the story of Andrew trying to catch his first chinook salmon at the river mouth. So back in the day, Andrew grew up near Lake Simcoe. Mm-hmm. And for most of the fishing that he did was either shore fishing. You're fishing the sunken piers down at Lake Simcoe from shore. A little bit ice fishing, some trolling for lake trout, pike fishing at the cottage. But that was about it.
Yep.
He had very little or no experience with fishing for river fish like stream trout. And that is what I grew up doing. So it was kind of like I always dreamed of doing the things Andrew did, like bass fishing, and he dreamed about trout fishing. So it was kind of like whenever we fished with each other, one of us was always like amazed.
Yeah.
So anyway, I forget how old we were. We were still teenagers at the time, like young teenagers.
Yeah.
Maybe like 15, 16. Andrew came down from his house and it was fall time, which was perfect because I had regaled stories to Andrew over the years of catching chinook salmon at the river mouth on, J13 Raplas and little Cleos and stuff for years. And he was always like, I want to catch a salmon. I want to catch a salmon.
I'd never caught like a fish bigger than, a few pounds, a couple pounds.
Yeah. So I'm like, what's the better way to do that by doing what any person does in the fall is just go down the pier and chuck spoons and catch a huge one, like a 20 pounder. So anyway, we decided to do that. Andrew actually, we had not a sleepover. We were teenagers, but like he came over in the fall and he didn't have any salmon gear. And,
Sorry, I just had to interject here to add a story onto your story. It's like double flashback. But I remember that time when I was sleeping over, you were like, Jesse was a very good host. And he's like, you can sleep in my bed. I'm going to sleep on the couch downstairs. Yeah. So I was sleeping up there and you had a fish tank in your room. And at that stage in my life, if I was sleeping and there was like noise going on in the room, I would not wake up to any noise. So I woke up to Jesse like pretty much jumping on my chest, shaking me violently. He's like, do you not hear that? And the alarm is going off right beside my head. And his like dad is a shift worker at GM. And he's like, you're waking the whole family up. Like, why didn't you hear that? And he was downstairs and heard his alarm clock and it's beside my head. And I had like no clue.
They say Andrew's clueless and sometimes he is. But anyway, yeah. So we got up early. We went down to the river mouth.
Well, Jesse did.
Yeah. And it was one of those days when it was like flat calm water and the fish were just jumping out of the water like free willy all the time. And I was like, oh man, this is going to be a good day. This is going to be a good day. And again, like I said, Andrew didn't have any salmon gear at the time. I think he just had like a 6'6" medium spinning rod pretty much. Yep. And a bunch of crankbaits and stuff. I just told him, bring, some crankbaits, some spoons if you got them. We went down to the harbor and I was chucking some J13s and I think the first lure that I told Andrew to throw, I'm like, one of my favorite lures to recommend to people for shore casting for salmon is a lipless crankbait. Mm-hmm. Lipless crankbaits are fantastic, and like we like fire tiger, hot orange, colors like that. Andrew had a baby bass color. He's like, I only have this baby bass color, and I was like, okay, whatever, just throw it on. You never know. He's casting out, and I'm like, listen, when you hook a fish, make sure to have your drag a little bit loose. And he's like, why? Because he had never caught a fish at the time that actually would furiously pull line off the reel. Yeah. Like a bass generally might pull a little bit, but a salmon is like hooking a rapidly sinking anchor. There's no stopping it when you hook it, right? So there's fish jumping everywhere. It's early in the morning. he whips out his crankbait, and within a few minutes, this angry king just smashed this rattle trap, or I think it was a rattling rapala.
Rattling rap, yep.
Just smashed it, and he literally had it on for like 3 seconds.
Yeah.
His drag was too tight. It was just like, just snapped him off, and he was just like, ah, and I was like, there you go. And he's like,
I remember my question to Jesse. I looked over and I'm like, what was that?
I was like, that, my friend, was a salmon. Yeah. And he quickly realized at that moment that these strong fish actually fought. So the funny thing is, that day, I think it was like maybe an hour, and the fish were hitting anything, and Andrew hooked and lost, I think, three fish. He lost his crankbait. He proceeded to lose my next crankbait that I gave him.
And one of your J13s.
And then lost one of my J13s. So I was out like $20 that day. But
yeah, back then, their paddles only cost $10.
Yeah, I think back then the J13s were like
$9 something.
$9.99 or $10.99.
Yeah.
Anyway, I thought that was a funny story because back in the day, me and Andrew, like we always say, we both had different styles of fishing. We both fished for different fish. And as we've grown up together as anglers, we've really forced each other to learn different techniques. Like, I can say for a fact that I became a better pike angler because I fished with Andrew, because he thinks like a pike. He's just a slimy guy.
I'm just like, teeth, slime.
Andrew's like, minnows, my favorite. But I thought that was funny because just the look on his face when he hooks this fish that, you know, when you first hook a salmon and it kind of does the whole just random head shake, then all of a sudden it's just like, zzz! It's like at first they don't know what's in their mouth. And once it clicks in their mind that, oh, there's something pulling on me, they just swim as fast as they can in the opposite direction.
Yep.
Or directly towards you, which is even more terrifying. And it was just funny because you didn't even realize what the heck was going on. And it was just like instant snap.
Yeah.
I thought it was so funny. But anyway, that's my story time. Just one of those memories. I was actually thinking about that the other day because I was going through my salmon box, and there was a bunch of like rattle traps and rattling rapalas. And I was like, remember that time Andrew lost a bunch of my lures?
I was using, if I remember that combo correctly, it was a 2500 spinning reel. It was my old Abu Garcia spinning reel.
Wow.
With 10-pound mono.
Ugh.
And no, it might have been it was 30-pound braid because I was rigged
Even
up
worse.
for pike. And I was like, it's like, how did it break 30-pound line? Like, I had never snapped 30-pound line in anything. It blew my mind that there's 30-pound braid. And I was like, this is so awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, to have these salmon just snap it instantly, like, I could not comprehend it at that time. I had zero understanding. I was very limited in my fishing knowledge and experience.
Yeah.
So we talked about last week of how to improve as an angler. Well, I've done a lot of improvement over the years. I'm happy to say.
Yes. Anyway, I thought that was funny.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm excited for this episode, though, because the fishing lure episodes, I'll tell you, statistically, looking at the analytics for our podcast, a lot of the fishing lure episodes have done very well.
Good.
And I've had many people tell me they've listened to them multiple times, which is interesting.
Nice.
But yeah, again,
that's good. They take
just
most work to do.
Yeah. We would just like to add, if there are any episodes that you've listened to, because we're almost up to 40 episodes here.
Yep.
If there are any episodes that you particularly liked, or you liked the topic, let us know. And next season 2, which is coming in the new year, we'll do similar ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first one, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about fear.
Yeah.
So here's something that perhaps you need to be fearful of. So let's say you're fishing and you see a cougar.
Okay.
Or do you? It could be the puckwudgie. I knew you'd laugh at the name. So the puckwudgie is found in it's given like a whole bunch of names here. It's crazy, but it's found in multiple different Aboriginal and Indigenous lore and stories. So it literally translates to little ones or little people in the Anishinaabe language. Now, they are known as little people of the forest in Algonquin folklore, similar to the European gnomes or fairies in their folklore. The puckwudgie stories are told throughout the northeastern United States, southeastern Canada, and the Great Lakes region. And there are some variances with all the different tribes and whatnot. So it is considered a mischievous, but basically good-natured creature who plays tricks on people, but is not dangerous. And that's in the Great Lakes tribes.
Okay.
Now, with other tribes, the creature can kind of change in temperament because of their lore about it. In the Abenaki and other northeast Algonquin tribes, a pukwudgie can be dangerous, but only to people who treat him with disrespect. Okay, be respectful if you see some tiny creature. That's with any living creature. Be respectful. In the Wampanoag and other tribes of the southern New England, pukwudgies are capricious and dangerous creatures who may play harmless tricks or even help a human neighbor, but are just as likely to steal children or commit deadly acts of sabotage. According to some Wampanoag stories, pukwudgies were enemies of the culture hero Maushop, which is another, again, character from those stories, and were even responsible for his death. So, you want to hear the description of them?
Yes. I mean, I literally don't, but okay.
Pukwudgies are usually described as being knee-high or even smaller. Their name literally means person of the wilderness, and they are usually considered to be spirits of the forest. In some traditions, they have a sweet smell and are associated with flowers. Pukwudgies have magical powers which vary from tribe to tribe, but may include the ability to turn invisible, confuse people, or make them forget things. I feel like I've run into a bunch in my life. Or shapeshift into cougars or other dangerous animals, or bring harm to people by staring at them.
It sounds like a skinwalker.
Except tiny. It's knee high.
True. A mini skinwalker. That's all those characteristics are terrifying. And I'm pretty sure that if we made a movie about this, it would be like the hottest horror film ever.
But, around us, we're in the Great Lakes area, so he was just kind of good-natured and would play pranks on you. So
that's okay.
At least if you're fishing around us and you happen to run into one of these pukwudgies, chances may be lower than you think, but
he'll probably just tie your shoelaces together and run away.
He'll be like, haha, you're waiters, and put a small slit in it just so you get a wet sock at the end of the day. He nicks all of your musculators. Oh. It's not dangerous, but you just hate yourself at the end of the day. What would you do if you actually came across some knee-high man just dancing through the forest?
I'm pretty sure I'd whip out my phone quick and try to take a picture of it. That's for sure. But I'll tell you, I fish Austral Creek a few times, and I've seen some weird things happen down there.
That's just your regular meth head.
Yeah.
It's and those we drop kick. So that was the first one.
That's pretty cool. I have to admit that.
The pukwudgie. Yeah. I love it. It's such a funny name. So there's a lot of stories, and again, our laughter is not at all to laugh at other cultures by any means, but it's entertaining stories, and they had these stories around to teach lessons about part of their beliefs of the origin of different things, but also, and the next one is going to be about the origin of Turtle Island.
Ooh.
But it's oftentimes within these stories, it's about you get a lot of morals and whatnot, right? So you think of that, it's treat them with respect if you see them. They're don't start disrespecting these guys,
or else they'll kill you,
or steal your children.
Yeah.
So another one is Turtle Island. Where do you think, or what do you think Turtle Island is? Because it's a real place, and many tribes native to our area believed in the origin and of Turtle Island. What do you think it is? What landmass?
Is it something in Hudson's Bay?
Nope. It's all of North and Central America.
Ah.
You were way off.
That's one big turtle.
So it was...
I feel like such an idiot.
You should. So Turtle Island is the name for the lands now known as North and Central America. It's a name used by some indigenous peoples who believe their land was formed on the back of a turtle. Now, there's regional versions of this story, but and different animals had essentially were the result or the one who managed to help create Turtle Island. In the different folklore with the Aboriginal communities, they would often have the characters are just named after other animals. So like Coyote is one. If you're reading into the stories, Coyote is one of my favorites just because he was a trickster. You know, you think of like someone like Loki, we know from the Marvel movies, like he's a trickster god. Mm-hmm. That was essentially Coyote was similar. He was a trickster. But there's different characters that are often named after animals, or they portrayed animals. So different animals all tried to swim to the bottom of the ocean to bring back dirt to create land, but they all failed. So the whole earth right now is essentially, in the story, is all water. A muskrat was the last animal to attempt the task. The muskrat swam deep and remained underwater for a long time. Eventually, the muskrat surfaced with some wet soil in its paws. Sadly, the swim took the muskrat's life, but Nanabush, who essentially was a creator figure, took the soil and placed it on the back of a turtle. With this act, land began to form, and so became Turtle Island. So I know we talked about before, we had talked about a creature that we nicknamed, or that we came up with, the Opeonga Killer. And it was essentially a large, like, musky head with a turtle body, and it will disguise itself as like an island.
Yeah.
This is the ultimate version. We always think Opeonga Killer and like a snapping turtle is its baby. Opeonga Killer is the baby of Turtle Island. Yeah. So there's sometimes it features a raven or a sky woman that has the origin of land of Turtle Island, but yeah, that's one of the stories. And there's actually, a fun little fact, there's over 1,000 different Native American nations, I believe, in the Americas, just North and Central America. Wow. That's a lot. So you can imagine, of all each tribe would have their own versions of these stories. So that's kind of one of them. Okay. Now, we had a story already about salmon. Yeah. So did you know about a lot of these are Aboriginal. I kind of got on a kick of looking at some of these. So a little bit of cryptids or creatures from lore. The salmon, that's something that we all know. So do you know this story of the Aboriginal, how they came to believe the salmon spawning? Because they relied on it for food every single year. Right? It was always looking to the land to give them support, and they would respect the land back. So there we go. So especially on the coastal First Nations, this is going back to the West Coast is where this legend came from. So the salmon people, like I said, sometimes in the lore, a creature is personified as a person almost. So salmon are a proud race. They are happy to come ashore each year and give their rich flesh to feed the people, but they must be treated with respect. And that was from Donna Joe. It's a quote. Not sure exactly what that's from, but it kind of gives you a baseline for the premise of this legend. So the legend of the salmon people is told by many First Nations cultures, and these helped shape the traditions and lifestyles that were passed down from one generation to the next. So they believed that a spiritual world interconnected with the physical world, and that the animal people could enter into the human world to give their bodies to supply men with food, fur, and other materials. After their flesh is used, the animals would return home, put on new flesh, and re-enter the human world whenever they chose. So the First Nations revere and work in cooperation with the animal people to ensure their return. Okay. So the story of salmon. This is the Salish First Nations legend version. So Raven, character, traveled by canoe from the Bella Coola River to the salmon people's village in the Pacific Ocean. The chief invited Raven for dinner, but warned him not to eat any of the bones of the salmon. Do you need reminders to do that, Jesse?
Not myself. I don't like bones.
So Raven was mischievous and hid a bone in his mouth. Like, fun. After dinner, when the chief threw the bones into the river, they turned into salmon. But the people knew something was wrong. Raven reluctantly returned the missing bone, and the fish transformed into the chief's daughter. Raven grabbed the girl, brought her aboard his canoe, and returned to the Bentic Arm. There, he made her promise to return each year with salmon and released her. Ever since, sockeye come to the Bella Coola River, and the Salish return their salmon bones to the water. So it's still cultural where they'll eat the salmon, but then put all the bones back in the river. Which is funny because that's tradition, and I don't see anything wrong with putting fish carcass back in the water. But technically, in Ontario, that's illegal to do. That's under our, more. I don't know. They do that apparently to prevent, especially for invasive creatures and whatnot. You could have fertilized eggs, or if you're mixing multiple carcasses, you could be releasing like sperm and eggs that could be fertilized now back into the water. Even if you've killed the fish, it's a dead fish. So that's part of the reason apparently why they don't want to do that. They don't want that done in Canada law or in Ontario law. But I thought it was interesting.
That's a cool legend.
Imagine, like, you ever seen those videos of the when people, they'll take like a catfish or whatever and they'll fillet it quick and then put it back in the water and it's like twitching around.
Yeah, barbaric.
But imagine like you just finished like filleting up your salmon and you're like, time to throw the guts back, and it was like shoomp, just swims away like it was a full salmon again. You're like, catch it again.
I wish I could do that.
Or even better, just like you finish your rack of ribs and just like on your plate and just dip them in the sink and they're like, shoomp, just like back up to like a full rack of ribs. Like, delicious.
I would be so fat.
What do you mean would be? Oh. So a fun one to talk about next. We already talked about before that we had, as a reference in this episode, the every one of these times that we do a lore, we've actually been able to mention something that we've come up with, Jesse and I. And what we try and do is every year, we've kind of made it a tradition now, is when we go to a new lake or we do our annual trip, we'll come up with a new cryptid.
Yeah.
A new like mythical creature that we'll joke around in the whole trip. And then we try and carry this on throughout.
And tell everyone that we meet.
Yep. So,
and we do have very active imaginations, if you couldn't tell.
So we talked about before the Opeonga Killer. We had the legend of the Big Kahuna.
Yeah.
So tell us this year, Jesse, what was the one that we came up with?
Well, some backstory. We fished this lake, which is actually a flooded river up north, and it was full of deadheads, which are basically floating logs of trees that used to be, that were flooded. So this,
and they're all like barely sticking above the water. They don't float up, they'll float down, but as the water level rises and lowers, they'll always stay like either just below or just above the water surface,
which makes them a big danger if you're driving a boat.
Yes.
So we were fishing this lake and it is full of deadheads. I've never seen a lake that has so many deadheads in it. It's terrible. Yeah. So we're always joking. We were like, what are these? Some of these, they look like big, just snakes sitting like right under the surface, right? And then Andrew's like, it's kind of like an eel. And we were trying to think of a name for this mythical cryptid that we could come up with. So we came up with log eel, which is two words put together, log and eel, which is super, creative. But you have to say it sort of like in a French way. It's like log eel.
Yes.
So log eel is basically a huge 30-foot eel that sits at an angle with its head
disguises itself
barely under the surface. And as you drive up and you see it's a log and slow down, the thing just comes up and eats you.
And the cool thing about it is it can remain dormant for years, even up to a decade.
Yes.
So you may not, you may have heard stories before of a lone canoeist or kayaker having gone missing in that lake or on that river system. And it happens from time to time. There's some freak accidents. And they're like, you know what? It's not every year. It's not consistent enough. And being of a serpent variety, like being serpent-like as an eel, it can actually slow its metabolism, and it can stay dormant for such a long period of time that it doesn't bring any heat upon itself. Of like, oh, someone just died there. It's like, they could either feed on 3 people at once, or wait for the next unsuspecting lone canoeist, feast, and then just lie dormant for 10 more years
and digest him slowly over years.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, you won't know if you're looking around and you see a deadhead. You don't know if that could be the log eel or not, because its skin is very, very much like it doesn't. It's not like Mystique from X-Men, where she can like change her thing, like change her look. It's not like that. It looks like a log, and the only time you're gonna know that it's the log eel is when all of a sudden that log starts to rise out of the water. And all of a sudden you'll see that one, it looked like a knot of a branch broke off and it opens and that's its eye.
And it's just a
staring you
yellow
down.
eye staring at you.
Oh.
And
Yeah.
it kind of makes a noise like this. Go ahead. That last part was me screaming. So I think that would be terrifying. And throughout the day, or usually at night when you're heading back after fishing late,
Yep.
and you're at
get
the
your
front of the boat.
flashlight looking
Andrew's
around.
driving in the back, and he's like, "You get the flashlight and stand at the front of the boat and yell if you see a log." And I'm just at the front looking in the logs, and all of a sudden it's too late. By the time you know it's log gill, and he's just got your head in his mouth.
Yep. Yeah, it's we talked about it. It's kind of like the Sarlacc pit where it slowly digests you over time.
Yeah, and if you know what that is, you're a nerd. Congratulations.
So that's our most recent. If you yourself have ever seen or heard of the log eel before, let us know, because that's patent pending and trademarked, and we're going to sue the pants off who have not.
But we'd like to mention too, if you guys have any, lore that you've made up yourself, let us know, and we'd love to read it on the podcast.
Yeah, if you have any goofy stories or anything like that, absolutely let us know, and we'll feature it on the next lore episode. Another thing with when you're camping, Jesse, and you look up, like what's your, I know for me, one of the best things I like to do, or one of my favorite parts of camping up north, is at night, on a clear night, you look up and you just see like stars.
Yeah. Because like where we live, there's so much light pollution, you barely see any stars. And usually when you think you see one, it's a helicopter.
Yeah. And when you're far enough north, you'll look out and you'll see like the band of Milky Way across the sky.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's amazing. And I'm not a huge guy who's like, I don't know a lot of the constellations and whatnot, but the one that I do know that I will use quite often is the Big Dipper, because it helps you find the North Star, Polaris.
Yeah.
And for being able to navigate, it's I think it's a really good idea to know how to find it. And I'll just quickly describe, when you're looking at the Big Dipper, so you have the ladle handle that comes down into the cup. The front edge of the cup, there's two stars that make that front edge. So you want to follow that with your fingers. You can put your thumb and your index finger up in the sky, and you're pointing at those two stars. You follow that line of the cup that those two stars make in 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces further in that same distance. So 4 times the length between those two stars in that line. The brightest star right there, that's Polaris. And if you understood what I just explained, good for you, because I don't think Jesse did.
I did.
So that's Polaris there. It's in line with the front edge of the cup. And it's just something, it's fun to know. And I like knowing weird things, but it can be really helpful if in a survival situation, or if you're just, it's gotten dark, you're trying to orientate yourself back in the lake where you're camping and getting back to your campsite. But did you know what the Aboriginal or indigenous story about that constellation? And they don't call it the Big Dipper. It's called the Fisher constellation.
I like that better.
Now, it's not, when I say Fisher, what do you think of?
I'm thinking of the small woodland rodent.
It's not small, but it is a, and it's not a rodent.
It's like a weasel.
It's in the weasel family, and it's very similar. Picture a mink, if you ever seen a mink, but make it the size of like a large coyote. They were thought to be extinct for a while, but they are very cool creatures. I actually did see one myself. I love those things. But they were almost trapped to full extinction in the area because their fur is much like mink fur, except they're way bigger than mink. So they're very sought after by trappers. So this is a story of the constellation Fisher, or Ursa Major, the Big Dipper. The Fisher was living somewhere in this world. Nobody knows where. Now in those times, they had no summer. It was winter. Winter all the time.
So Canada.
Pretty much. They knew that summer existed somewhere, but it never came to them, although they wanted it very much. I agree.
Yep.
Now, once upon a time, a man captured some little birds, which are called nibenis, summer guardian birds. He tied them in bundles and kept them with him all the time. That was the reason why it was continually winter. For so long as he held these birds, they could not bring summer to the North Country. The people pondered very much how to go about freeing these birds from the creature who kept them. At last, somebody discovered where this creature lived, and they decided that someone would go and try to free the summer birds. Now, the freshwater herring lived in the same wigwam with the man who kept the summer birds. The fisher at last decided to go and free the birds so that summer would come. He traveled a long while and reached the wigwam where the captor and the herring lived. When he went in, he found the herring alone. He captured the herring and put some pitch on his mouth. Pitch is like tree sap, hard tree sap. So he put some pitch on his mouth so that he could not cry out. Then Fisher took the bundles of birds and tried to break the bindings so that he could free them. Using his teeth, at last he tore open the bundles and the summer birds flew free into the air. Then the pitch broke from the herring's mouth and he cried out, "Fisher breaks the bundle! The summer birds! Fisher breaks the bundles with his teeth! The summer birds!" 2 or 3 times he cried out until their captor heard him. Then he came up running, but when he arrived, the fisher and summer birds were far away. The fisher ran very fast to save himself. His pursuer had a bow and arrow with which he was going to kill him. But the fisher sprang into the sky and climbed way up with the hunter following him behind, still trying to shoot him with his bow and arrow. All he succeeded in shooting, however, was his tail, which is broken where it was wounded. And that's the bend in the handle of the Great Dipper's constellation. That's where he shot him, apparently. The small star Alcor in the wound. Although they chased him continually, they never got him. Now, I'll give you a guess. What constellation do you think that hunter is?
He's that one with the 3 stars together.
Orion.
Yeah.
Orion's belt.
Yeah.
And he has... You can see the 3... Oftentimes you'll only see the 3 stars, and you might see his shoulders, his thighs essentially below him, and then in front of him. And when you're further north, you'll see this. Down here, you'll pretty much only see the shoulders and his belt and maybe his thighs. But up north, you'll actually see he's drawing a bow and arrow, technically in the shape of the constellation. And so that's the hunter that shot the fisher.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So
I like that
they had
better
stories
than...
about the constellation as to like how, like that's the fisher constellation. So how did that get up in the sky? Oh, it's this story.
I like how we're just like, it's a ladle.
When you use the word ladle, what do you do with ladles? So you dip them in gravy. Well, there's a little one and a big one. Call the Little Dipper and the Big Dipper. I don't know why it's like an American guy who's discovered this. It's probably like Galileo. He's like, oh, look at the big dip.
Super Mario.
I put it on my pizza with the sauce. We just got canceled in 17 countries.
That's interesting. As I said before, the last time we talked about the legends of the loon, I do prefer the Aboriginal legends.
Yeah.
They're so much more interesting than anything that we normally have.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool how I like learning to see what other people had, like their beliefs and whatnot, or their, like with Aboriginal cultures, because it was always around the world. They always have this lore, their way of explaining why things are, because they didn't have science. They didn't have stuff to explain by means of the scientific process, like we all grew up learning. Yeah. So to them, that the most logical thing that they could explain is these stories. That's how these things are around. So I find it interesting to see and fascinating to see what different parts of the world believed happened in their stories that they made up to explain these natural phenomena.
Yeah, for sure.
So another one is actually I gotta give shout out to one of our followers. So he actually messaged us on Instagram as a little aside. So this is I don't know if I can say his name. Did you ask if we could say his name?
I didn't ask, so
okay, I won't say his name.
Say his first name.
I'll say it. Yeah. So it's Linus. Thank you, Linus, for messaging us. So he said, "Hi, I listened to your latest AOA Q&A and heard you talk about your listeners' demographic, and just wanted to come clean and admit that I might be the crazy Swedish person that have listened to all your episodes multiple times. Keep up the great work, guys." So we love messages like this is awesome. Thank you so much for writing to us, Linus. And when Jesse sent me this, it inspired me to write about, or to, not to, I didn't write about it. I did research on some other people's, what they wrote about something in Sweden. Still aquatic, trying to keep like stuff you would perhaps come across while fishing,
Okay.
stuff like that. So this creature is inspired by Linus. Now, not the creature itself. It's the story. Me reading the story, that idea was inspired by Linus, not the creature itself. I don't want to offend him because this creature's weird. So it's called the Fossegrim, I believe is how you say it. And it is a pretty interesting creature. It's found in Swedish folklore, in like Scandinavian folklore. So Fossegrim plays the fiddle, and he's been associated with like other spirits from that folklore and whatnot, the water spirits, the mill spirit, but is also called Naken in Sweden, and it's associated with river streams. So the Swedish name for him is Stromkarlen, which means the water stream man.
Ah.
Pretty cool. And particularly with cascading streams. If you want to see a photo of him, Jesse, there's a weird one. So, what does he do? And what is he? What's anything about him? Do you have any guesses? I showed you he's kind of like humanoid, but any guesses as to what he does?
He controls the water flow?
Interesting, but no.
Okay.
Actually, you're kind of right, actually. It's like, in a way. So, Fossegrim is described as an exceptionally talented fiddler. The sounds of the forest, wind, and water play over his fiddle strings. He can be induced to teach the skill. The Swedish Stromkarl's lay is said to have 11 variations, the final one being reserved for the night spirits because when it is played, tables and benches, cup and can, graybeards and grandmothers, blind and lame, even babies in the cradle will begin to dance.
Wow.
So he's pretty talented if he can make all that stuff dance. He can barely get me to dance. I'm just kidding. I love dancing.
He does.
So Fossegrim is said to be willing to teach away his skills in exchange for a food offering. Now here's another question, Jesse. Let your imagination run wild.
Okay.
A food offering. What would you give this water guy who sits underneath little waterfalls and plays a fiddle? And you want him to teach you the fiddle.
Okay.
And
so
he wants a food sacrifice, pretty much. Food offering.
Okay,
What
so
would you give him?
right off the bat, I'm not offering him any fish.
Okay.
Okay, because he lives around fish. I'm not offering him any sautéed mushrooms or fiddleheads because
Okay.
that's something he can probably get.
Okay.
Or rabbit. Nah. I'm going to offer him, what's that really expensive steak that they feed the cow champagne?
Wagyu beef. Is that where they feed them lobsters?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like fatten them. And...
I'm going to offer him a steak dinner.
You're not far off.
Is it human flesh?
No,
Okay,
it's not
thank-
human flesh.
thank
Thank
goodness.
goodness. So there's two things that is apparently he will accept. First, he will take a food offering made on a Thursday evening in secrecy. A white he-goat thrown with his head turned away into a waterfall that flows northwards.
Very specific.
I wonder how many times that happened by accident. Or smoked mutton,
Okay.
stolen from the neighbor's storage 4 Thursdays in a row. If there is not enough meat on the bone, he will only teach the supplicant how to tune the fiddle. You're like, oh wow. I can do that with an app on my phone. If the offering is satisfactory, he will take the pupil's right hand and draw the fingers along the strings until they all bleed. Imagine you're like, oh, I'm gonna pay for some guitar lessons, and like all of a sudden, name a guitarist that you'd want to learn from.
Joe Satriani.
Okay, Joe Satriani. Like, all right, here, give me your hand, and he just like in Ghost, just wraps his arms around you, holding a guitar, and just starts like running your fingers all over it till they just bleed. And he's like, this is how you learn.
Thanks, Joe.
So he runs your fingers along the strings until they all bleed, after which you will be able to play so well that the trees shall dance and torrents in their fall stand still. So like you say, being able to control the water. So yeah, there were actually some different famous fiddlers who were rumored to have learned from the Fossegrim, but that's like back in the 1800s and whatnot. But again, that was just rumored that they were able to do so. Kind of like how, you know, in later years, like, oh well, he sold his soul to the devil, and that's why you could shred a guitar. Like,
Yeah.
So that's that story, that idea has been happening since the early 1800s. Of he met this weird water spirit and made his fingers bleed.
Remind me
And
not
now
to
he
visit
play.
Sweden.
So yeah, so the description of the guy is weird. He's very humanoid. He's kind of like half goat in the face, and then he's sometimes depicted with like webbed, like chicken feet or something weird. It's bizarre. But yeah, he's a fiddler. So yeah, that's that one. Thank you very much, Linus. And I hope you look nothing like him. So that's all the lore that I had prepared there, Jesse. Like I said, these episodes, they take a lot to get prepped, because unlike most of our other topics when we talk about jig fishing, Jesse and I will just like, let's share stories of when we used to jig fish and do this. And stories like this, it's let's tell stories of all these weird creatures we met in our life. Like, yeah, no, we're not, Greek mythical creatures who went on long ship journeys and speared, put on sheepskins to escape from cyclopses and stuff. Like, we didn't have that life.
Yeah.
I just got a tinner, for goodness sakes.
I like these episodes, the lore ones. They're very interesting.
Yeah.
To finish this episode off, though, I do have some Q&A.
Okay. I will say one thing, because I did prepare one extra little thing, very short.
Okay.
As to, it was another Aboriginal story. I actually tried to look up if there's any specific stories about pike. And unfortunately, there's only two stories that I could find that the indigenous people had about pike specifically.
Okay.
Because pike weren't actually looked at, much like today, weren't really sought after as a food fish. But the legend of the pike is that it was essentially a huge monster that could eat people. And so the one story was
Big Kahuna, basically.
Pretty much, right?
Yeah.
So we weren't far off.
Yeah.
So the one story is of a mother with two children, and she told them not to go into the water. No matter what, you shouldn't enter into the water. And they would fish the water for food and whatnot. And the one boy, he, didn't listen to his mother and jumped in the water, and he was eaten by the pike. So his brother went and told his mother, and they were trying to catch this creature, this monster. And after a few weeks, they were able to catch this monster. They used some live bait. Yeah, it's effective. And they caught this huge pike, and they cut open its stomach, and there was the other brother in there screaming, "It's burning!" And he was upset because it took him so long to get the pike, and he was starting to be digested.
Wow.
But then they healed him, and he was okay. So, all's well that ends well, except for that pike who got his belly cut open.
We should do a short story about that. We should film something.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Anyone know where there's any 8 to 9 foot long northern pike?
We'll just put them in front, and we'll use like G.I. Joe dolls, just like holding pike and like getting eaten by pike, but it's only like a 24-inch pike. It's really 10 meters.
Well, that was brutal. All right.
Actually, I was just thinking, how big would a pike have to be technically to eat, let's say, a kid? Let's say a kid's like 10 years old. He's what, 3 feet long? 3.5 feet tall?
Something.
A pike can eat 1/3 of its body length.
So if you have a 9 foot long pike,
yeah,
which doesn't exist, but you never know. Freak of nature,
Yeah, you kind of, maybe there's some truth to that tale. All right, Jeremy Wade, we need you to catch a 9-foot pike. Get back, come out of retirement. You said you caught all the river monsters. I'm calling, that's not true. There's giant pike out there that can eat people.
All right, let's do some Q&A.
Okay.
All right. I just have a few of these, and I'm going to ask these to Andrew, because a lot of these are directed to Andrew. So
Either people really like me or they just think that I have really dumb responses.
Both. So, someone asks, what happened to Vlad Ivanov?
So I still have the book. He will be making a comeback. We will have some more stuff with him in our next season. But when we talked about, I try and use him as an interesting fishing fact when we talk about a species specific episode, and I'll kind of use that to start off the topic. So we haven't really done too much of the species specific episodes besides salmon. And I don't remember if I talked about him with the salmon episode, but I do know in that book he didn't talk about chinook. It was all about Atlantic salmon. So next time we do a species specific episode, and there are more species in the book we haven't touched, I will have more from him. Thanks for asking. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah. Here's another question. How do you pass time while you're waiting for a bite?
I pretend that I'm getting bites.
Yeah. You know what I've noticed is you usually, and I've talked to so many carp guys and steelhead guys that are, bottom fishing or whatever, and they'll always tell you the same thing. When do the fish bite? When you're taking a pee.
Yep.
When you take a pee, as soon as you unzip your fly, that fish is biting right then.
If Jesse's waiting for a bite, he just like stands up every 30 seconds and unzips. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, triggering a bite.
But realistically, when, say we're carp fishing or sometimes we'll, bottom bounce for browns or whatever, me and Andrew, if we're fishing together, generally, we're just talking. I mean, it's nice to be able to fish with a fishing buddy so you can, shoot the breeze, so to say. Time flies by so fast. Like, I know me and Andrew have had a lot of like long nights where we just talk, and sometimes we'll be like, like, how are you doing, man? Like, how are you holding up? Works hard, this, that. We're just talking, and you end up fishing way longer than you want.
Yep.
Like, I mean, we love to fish as long as possible. Sometimes, you get into a good conversation and the fishing sucks. No bites, but we're still talking, and it's 11:30 p.m. and like, oh crap, we should go home. So recommendation one is get a fishing buddy.
Yep.
Even my wife likes to go fishing with me because we'll just sit, like, I'll bait up some rod pods, bait out the water, chum, set them up, put the buzzers on so we don't have to pay attention, and then we'll just sit there and talk.
During the summer or warmer months, I should say, springtime, even into the fall, there's so much activity that when you actually like sit down and are quiet. There are times when Jess and I were fishing, or if we're on our own or whatever, and you're waiting for, let's say we're carp fishing, and you're waiting for a bite. You'll still see other activity. You have like squirrels running around. You have like mice that like run through the grasses, and there's stuff to watch. It gets dark. You're getting to see the sun or the stars in the sky. You get maybe there's a storm off in the distance. You're watching the lightning strike. There's always something that I don't mind the quiet moments that you just kind of unwind.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's always that. Unless you're ice fishing, then it's like, oh my goodness, when did the fish come?
I have another question.
It was a cold and hostile wasteland.
This question: what's your favorite musky lure? It might not even be like your best lure, but what's your favorite lure to fish?
It's the one I just retired.
Yeah.
It's every time I put on that pikey chub, I just every single time I sat like, Jesse, just look at this wobble. It's like I've seen it 100 times. I'm like, I know, just look at it again. Like, I loved that bait, and just the whole build up, for 2 years fishing it before I actually caught a muskie on it.
And if you're not familiar with what a pikey chub, what is it?
It's a creek chub brand,
Creek chub.
which I'm trying to collect like the whole series. I really like that brand a lot.
Collect them all.
Yeah. And gotta catch on them all. So it's the pikey chub was a very common jointed bait. They have it as jointed or non-jointed, but it has a steel like step down lip similar to what you have on the Super Shad Wrap style.
Yep.
And but I had a musky one, or I have a musky one, and it's like the Magnum size, so it's like 8 inches long or 7 inches long, and it's got such a
wild, erratic wobble.
Like you look at like a J13, and essentially I find on a J13, like the front has a bit of a wobble, but the tail has all the action. On the pikey chub, or the pikey chub, like creek chub minnow, it like the whole head would like swing around. Like it was, I don't know, it it just has a different wobble than any other jointed bait I've used. I love it.
It's great. And I'd have to say for me, some of the lures that I really enjoy using, I love using like dive and rise suics.
Yeah.
I could fish one of
really
those
fun
all
to
day.
use.
Not necessarily the best lure to use all day, but I love using suics. I like, it's a very visual thing because you can see the thing dive and rise up. I really did the best with tubes this year. I was actually just talking to a guy who ordered a bunch of tubes, and I was like, dude, they catch.
Yeah.
And I've been hearing that. You watch YouTube videos and you're like, guys are slamming fish on tubes.
I was there for your second tube fish. I was right at the boat side strike. That was awesome.
Actually, so funny story if you don't follow us on Instagram. So we've been using Water Wolf Gator tubes, and they're not even big ones. They're 9-inch. Yeah. So they're a big tube if you're comparing it to a bass tube, but these tubes get big. Like I think Red October has what they call the Big Sexy, and it's like a 12-inch tube. And I know Water Wolf has like a prototype 15-inch tube coming out. But I was fishing with Bobby Belmonte. He's a fishing guide. And he had this big, it was like a 13-inch tube. And he was like, yeah, no problem. Just chuck it out. Like fish will smash it, right? I was just using the 9-inch. I felt like I was using a finesse bait. But what I did is I caught a 41-inch that day. And then what I did is I modified it because I saw a guy on YouTube. He had on the back treble hook a blade. So you can buy them. I know Water Wolf Lure sells the blades. I think they're called like tail gunners or something like that. You can buy a blade and put it on the back. And I was like, I was going fishing the next day and I couldn't order one. So I was just like, you know what? I like tinkering and making stuff. So I made one myself. I ripped apart an old spinner bait. I took the blade off. I put on a nice ball bearing swivel and some fluorocarbon to loop it on. And I put epoxy on it, some shrink tube over it. And I did it. And I was like, this is going to kill. Cause like a tube, there's so many ways to fish it. But one of the ways that I was doing is like, I would kind of like yo-yo it back to the boat. Like I'd pull it up, the thing would float up. And then as it kind of spiraled down erratically, the tail and the blade on the back would just kind of spin on the way down. And then when you pull it up, the blade would spin up. I think it just that little bit of vibration and attraction. And it was funny because like I tied that on. I was like to Andrew, like, dude, look at this. This looks sick. This looks sick. And you're like, oh, that looks so good. And we were fishing this one spot with our buddy Paul. And it was like, what, 12 foot, some nice green weeds.
Yep.
And I was just like, probably not even an hour into the day fishing. And I was just pulling the tube up and I was looking at the tail and all of a sudden this muskie came from under the boat and just crushed it.
I looked over at his bait coming in because he hadn't been fishing it for long. So I was like looking to see how he was fishing the tube and stuff.
And the blade was like bright orange. Yep. It's kind of eye catching. Yeah.
So I was looking right at his bait when I saw the full strike start to finish.
Yeah.
Was awesome.
It was great. And I'm not saying maybe that blade on the back is just, just a little bit of extra attraction, but that really solidified to me that tubes just work really good. So I definitely recommend if you're into muskie fishing, try a tube or any big rubber. Really, it's great. Here's another question. Would your Sports Pal setup be stable enough to catch muskie?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, Andrew's actually caught.
I caught my biggest muskie out of the Sports Pal.
Yep.
And I caught my first muskie out of my old trolling portage canoe.
Yeah.
And that was a 39-inch muskie that I caught out of that one. So you can catch muskie out of the Sports Pal. It was comfortable. It was nice.
Yeah.
To get it into the boat, again, we had a net with us, which I would highly recommend because leaning over any small craft, would be sketchy, especially pulling like that much weight in the boat. But we had it in the net, so I could lean over and hook it and stuff all in the net without having to bring it into the boat. We brought it up for a couple photos, put it back in the net. So it was nice having a big enough net, which can be a pain to, especially in such a small craft, but it was super useful because once you actually had the muskie in the net, it became way more safer to handle.
Yeah. Because
it was just contained outside of the craft. So
plus you don't want the fish flopping around the bottom of the canoe anyway, because that's bad fish handling, but it is, the Sports Pals are super stable, and you won't believe how stable they are until you actually fish them. Yeah.
And I figure eight, that was on a figure eight too. So I was standing. I was figure eighting right in the boat, and there's a boat side strike.
Like, how tall? You're 6'2"?
I'm 6'2". Yeah.
You're 6'2", I'm 5'11". We're both not skinny guys. Yeah. Like, we're both standing.
I'm well over 200 pounds.
Yeah, we're both standing in this canoe, and I don't think I've ever thought it was going to tip.
Yeah.
It's flat bottom. It's 36 inches wide. Yeah.
If we have a wake come by,
we sit down.
I sit down. Yeah.
Yeah. You just have to use common sense, but those Sports Pals are fantastic. I'm happy to have influenced a lot of people that have messaged me that said they got one because of us, and they're super happy with it. Think of it more for like ponds, rivers, small rivers,
It's so
small
light.
lakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're great. You can push the boundaries and push them onto some slightly bigger water, but I wouldn't recommend it. Here's another question. What do you do when your boat partner has to poop?
Oh,
That's a good question.
Have I got an answer for you?
All right, why don't you tell us, Andrew?
So I have in my boat, now I have a small Home Depot bucket that I have some grocery bag liners, or you can just get any solid, good plastic liner.
Yeah.
And I have in a Ziploc baggie, I have some toilet paper, and I have some Purell hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
So that is my emergency porta potty. And I'll pull the lid off, line the bucket. I have my toilet paper out to the side and stuff, and I can use it, and I can tie up the bag so it doesn't stink. If we're in the middle of the lake, I haven't had to do it yet.
Thank
But
goodness.
if we're in the middle of the lake, I'm like, hey, Jesse, just don't look back. I have to deal with this.
You don't have to tell me. I'm not going to be looking.
But otherwise, I always, even when camping and stuff, we always bring, obviously, toilet paper and hand sanitizer and whatnot. And I always just keep it in a small ammo box when you go camping.
Yep.
And so when we're fishing and doing that, yeah, we fish. We're in the boat all day, and you're in a canoe all day, even.
Yeah, and you're
then
eating,
we'll
eating
get to
chili
shore.
all day.
Yeah, we'll go to shore, and I'll just walk into the woods and do my stuff. But I make sure I'm prepared so I don't keep losing my left sock. I've done that too, but it's better just to have toilet paper.
Yeah.
It's not hard to prepare for that. I even have another one in a sandwich bag. I have like a half roll that I like sandwiched and crushed, sitting in a sandwich bag that I shove into my tackle box. So I have it always.
That's funny. I actually have a funny story about that. One day we had an Algonquin trip, and we were portaging in Andrew's. I'm pretty sure. No, we were in my sports bell. I'm pretty sure we were in the sports bell. We were loaded up, like barrels, tarps, everything we needed. The thing was maxed.
No, that wasn't mine because I had the transom.
Okay, yeah,
The
your canoe.
board
It
I
was
put on,
full. Like it was
Oh,
full.
it was loaded.
We were going across this lake, and it was super windy, wavy, and just bad. And I was just like, in my head, I was in the front of the canoe, and water was splashing in.
Yep.
And I was in that mode where I was like, let's just get to the site. Let's get out of the main lake. Once we get past the main lake around the corner, the wind won't be bad. And Andrew's just like, I have to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And I was like, you can hold it. I don't care.
I'm like,
he's like,
no, I
we're
can't.
stopping right now. And I was like, dear Lord, like the wind was pushing us into the island. He gets out of the canoe, and I'm just like rocking right on the shore, trying not to smash into the rocks because the wind was so bad. He runs into the forest, and all I hear is him just like crashing through the forest, and then silence. And then I'm like, you okay? And he's like, yep. And then he waddled back.
Yep.
But you know what they say? When you gotta go, you gotta go.
Let us know. I think this would be hilarious, but I have a whole bunch of funny pooping stories.
Yeah.
So if ever you weird listeners out there be like, that would be a funny topic for a podcast, is all about pooping in the woods.
Yeah.
I have enough content to fill that episode. I just want to put that out there.
That'll be one of those Patreon only.
If there would
content.
actually be interest from people to hear these stories, then message us. We don't need any details of why you want to hear it. Just let us know if you do.
All right, here's a good question. What was your most used setup for bass this season, or this year that just passed? Rod, reel, lure, line.
For me, it's my BFS, because I was... Actually, no, that's not true. I did my BFS a lot.
Your BFS was a lot last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, this year, what was it?
Because I will do have my new one this year, so I was using it a
Yeah.
fair bit. But it was my swim bait Kage rod, Daiwa.
Yeah.
And I have my Fuego, my Daiwa Fuego bait caster on there. And the lure I was casting most with that was the Hashimoto Concepts mag blade.
Yeah.
And that caught my biggest fish this year. All my biggest bass this year were caught on that.
That's
exact combo.
That's a 7 foot.
One.
No, it's a longer rod. I think it's like a
Oh, it's a
7.9.
Oh, it's not that long.
Is
No,
it?
It's like I don't know. Maybe I'd say 7.5.
Anyway, yeah.
Close to that.
I'm almost positive because I sold that to you, but it's a
Yeah.
longer rod, and it's a heavy swim bait rod,
Yeah.
like a bass heavy.
Yep.
And it's a great rod. Like you can cast slightly smaller stuff.
That goes down to like, what is it, 3/8 or something like that it can cast. It's
Yeah.
actually really impressive. And it goes up to, I think, 2 ounces or
Yeah.
3 ounces. Like, it's not like a huge swim bait rod, but It's a super versatile rod, and I was using that most of the time. I was doing everything on that this year.
Even
I
muskie.
was frogging. Yeah, that's what I caught my muskie on, my 40-inch muskie on.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's 100% my most used rod last year, or combo.
For me, I have a 7-foot 1-inch medium heavy St. Croix Victory. It's called the Grunt. It's just like a rod that does everything, and that's why I got it. And I ended up using that for almost everything for bass fishing, because like we were talking in last episode, I have a few more bougie rods. I have a 7-foot 2-inch medium heavy Shimano X Pride, like $400 rod. So I bought this Victory, which is significantly less expensive. It's lighter, it's way less expensive, and it works just as good. So I was just like, you know what? I don't want to bring this $400, bougie X Pride with me all the time, because I'm fishing out of a canoe. So I use this this Victory, the Grunt, just like a 7-foot medium heavy. The reel, I just had a Crotto or a Scorpion, something on it with like 30-pound braid. And I was using that for everything. I was using it for buzz baits, spinner baits, chatter baits. I caught all of my biggest bass and my biggest walleye on that rod this year, as well as a bunch of pike. But I caught my biggest largemouth this year, and my biggest walleye. I caught a really nice walleye up near Ottawa.
Yeah, that was a nice fish.
And that rod, it's exactly what it says. It's just a general purpose rod. I was getting to the point where, like, when I went sometimes just for like a day trip with my canoe, I'd only bring 2 rods. I'd bring like a spinning rod, and I'd bring the Grunt. And the Grunt would do everything. I caught frog fit. I used finesse, like weedless frogs on it in, dense, not super dense, but like, sparse cover.
Yeah.
And I was catching fish. It has a little bit more flex to it, so it's actually a fantastic chatterbait and spinnerbait rod too. Absolutely fantastic. I recommend that rod. And in general, just a 7-foot medium heavy rod. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
All right. Let's look at this good one right here.
For those on YouTube, sorry about all this dead air.
I'm going to cut this out. All right, here's a good one. So for the final AOA Q&A, someone has asked this. What is the dumbest excuse you have heard of for getting skunked?
The air got to it. I think the dumbest excuse I ever heard, and you know exactly who this is. There's a guy that we both know, and he was salmon fishing, and he got skunked salmon fishing from shore, which happens. But his reason for why is it was too windy. It's like, you're casting 3/4 ounce spoons. I don't care how windy it is. Those hunks of like steel.
Yeah.
It's like it's not gonna, wind won't affect your salmon in the harbor or the piers. Like it's too windy, they're not biting. It's like, I don't think that's your issue.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of really dumb excuses over the years, but yeah. Anyway, I thought that was a good little Q&A. If you ever want to have your question answered on our Q&A, definitely follow us on Instagram at Average Ontario Anglers, and we always put up polls every so often, and you can add your own, and we save them, and we do them at the next Q&A. So definitely do that. And I'd also like to take this moment to thank our Patreon members, which help us.
I was about to do that.
Okay, go ahead.
Excellent.
Take it away.
Thank you, Patreon people.
Yeah.
So we got a few more Patreon subscribers. So we want to thank all of the new ones, all of the existing ones from before as well. You guys are what helps this podcast continue to be made on a weekly basis.
Yeah, and I'm going to name some of the newer members.
Awesome.
We appreciate all the members. These are just the ones that have joined us in the last about a week, and we really appreciate it. So we have our buddy Jeff, we have Jeremy, Mike, and Adam are some of our newest Patreon members.
That's my brother, actually, Jeremy, in the middle.
Finally got Jeremy just actually give us $2 a month so he can, he's like, I listen to all your podcasts. I'm like, pay us money. Just kidding. And all the money that we get from you guys, again, it goes just to covering expenses so that we're not, supporting the show completely out of our own pocket. So we do appreciate all those. And we appreciate some of the members that have been with us since the beginning. So we do appreciate that.
And next year we are going to be having Patreon only content. So it'll be a bit more value for our Patreon members who are already helping us out, and a bit of more incentive for anyone else who's kind of humming and hawing. You'll be able to get more content than you would if you weren't subscribed to our Patreon. So for next year, next season, we're going to have some more stuff, especially for those people.
Yeah. And if you liked all the
More
giveaways we did
details
this
to
year,
follow.
we had a lot of really cool giveaways.
Yeah.
All those giveaways are going to be Patreon only. So that's what you got to do.
Yep.
So anyway, take it away.
All right. So thank you, everyone. Feel free to don't feel free. Please give us a review on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, whatever your streaming service you're on. Give us a follow. Give us a review, a like, whatever it is.
Yep.
And before we end the episode, we have, as usual, the quote of the week, and we're gonna hand that back to Jesse.
And the quote of the week is, "If you see a floating log, take a jog."